So the Crown Tundra released like a week ago at this point, and I'm going to be 100% honest with you. It was surprisingly good. Now, that's not something I expected to say at the start of this video. I expected this to fall under the same lines as the Isle of Armor, and be more or less just fine. Not good, but definitely not bad either. However, I'll give Game Freak credit where credit is due. The Crown Tundra was actually fun. Now, don't get me wrong, it has its downsides, it's by no means perfect, and this being the highlight of Sword and Shield doesn't mean it makes up for the lack of content the base game had, but we'll get there. Like my Sword and Shield review and my Isle of Armor review, I'm going to be breaking this video down into a few separate parts, and leaving timestamps for those segments in the description below. So, without any further delay, let's boot it back up. For starters, let's talk about the location. The Crown Tundra shows me that Game Freak can do the open world concept correctly, or at least well enough. This area feels real. It doesn't feel like an empty wasteland or a decent enough area that's heavily dictated by set paths. Each area in the Crown Tundra feels well realized. You've got the lush forests, the frozen tundras, admittedly only one town, which I was kind of hoping for more of, but you have ancient ruins, temples, caves, rivers, and more. The caves don't even really suck this time. They're actually winding paths rather than just being a big rocky bubble. Of course, the texture work still isn't that great, but I really don't expect them to fix that this game. On the texture front, the best we can really hope for is that they get it right in the next game. Things do look better than the wild area, and I'll even give it a slight edge on the Isle of Armor too, but that's still not saying much. Overall, out of the 3 open world areas, the Crown Tundra is by far my favorite. The wild area was bad, the Isle of Armor was better, and the Crown Tundra was surprisingly good. However, there's not really a whole lot of staying power once you finish everything. Once you find all the items, secrets, legends, and have taken in the overall scenery, there's not really a reason to rush back to the Crown Tundra other than it's the best looking of the bunch. Take the Isle of Armor for example. I find myself returning there namely for apricorn farming. The Crown Tundra doesn't offer anything around those lines. You can do raids, but most of the time I end up just fighting with the Wycom for raids or just taking part in the new Dynamax Adventures. Overall, this is a good location. I'd say it needs a little more of a kick once you finish off everything to really make people think, man, I really want to go back there, but all in all, it's pretty good. Next, let's go ahead and take a look at the Pokemon. There are more returning Pokemon this time around, and like I said in my Isle of Armor review, Game Freak is handling the returning Pokemon in the best way possible. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm okay with them omitting Pokemon from the franchise and re-adding them later. I think the opposite, in fact. The segmented release of the decks is not something that I enjoy. However, like with the Isle of Armor, you don't need to actually buy the DLC to obtain these Pokemon through Pokemon Home, Wonder Trade, or Standard Trades. Again, like I said in my Isle of Armor review, it's not exactly having your cake and eating it too, but it is the best case scenario for the situation we're currently in with the game. Hopefully, in the next go-around, just allow everything to be transferable from the start, whether they're catchable in the base game or not. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Likewise, with the addition of the ranked battle symbol, you don't even need to catch the Pokemon in Galar to take it online. You just have to give it this symbol, and you're good to go, meaning that players with the DLC won't outshine others online. For the most part, anyway. Like with the Isle of Armor, there is a bit of a gray area to that. 8 out of the 9 new Pokemon are competitively legal, and are exclusive to the Crown Tundra, so they can be taken online with official tournament rules. I'll give the Crown Tundra credit for adding more new Pokemon than the 3 the Isle of Armor did, but none of these Pokemon, outside of Slowking, are likely to be obtained by players who don't own the DLC. Point is, some players will have access to certain Pokemon that others are likely to never receive without obtaining the DLC. I covered my thoughts on this more in depth in my Isle of Armor review, so at the risk of not sounding like a broken record this time, I'm just going to leave it at that. As far as the new Pokemon themselves are concerned, I actually like a lot of their designs. Regieleki is now my new favorite Regi, even though I think the name Regielectric would have been better, but that's neither here nor there. Galarian Zapdos is my favorite of the Kanto trio, which feels weird to say because Articuno is my favorite of their Cantonian forms. Those horses are pretty basic in their designs, but honestly that's not a bad thing at all. Simplicity goes a long way sometimes. Calyrex took a bit to grow on me, namely because when I look at it all I can think of is some rejected Courage the Cowardly Dog character, but after going through the story, it grew on me. Everything else falls into the it's okay category for me. Not something I go out of my way to use, but they're Pokemon I wouldn't mind adding to a team here and there. Overall, the designs are pretty solid, and I feel like this was a suitable amount of Pokemon for a DLC to include, so it's definitely got that going for it over the Isle of Armor. And while we're on the topic of the Pokemon, following Pokemon also returned. Not really too much to say on that, it's just as half-baked as it was in the Isle of Armor. They didn't fix it, change how quickly the Pokemon move while following, none of that. It's still the same buggy mess it was 4 months ago. Next, let's go ahead and discuss some of the new features. Specifically, the Crown Tundra only really offered one major new feature, which was Dynamax Adventures. I was ready to write this off because looking at the board game-esque design, I figured it'd be kind of boring. But as someone who's a fan of raid battles already, this is a nice step forward for that concept. Basically, what it is that is a gauntlet of 4 battles in a row, capping off at a legendary Pokemon at the end of the line. There's even a higher chance of encountering shiny Pokemon here, having a 1 in 300 chance without the shiny charm and a 1 in 100 chance with the shiny charm. This is simultaneously a good and a bad thing. It's a good thing because there are personally some Pokemon I wouldn't mind having a shiny of, but it further makes shiny Pokemon kinda worthless. And between raid exploits, Pokemon Go community days, Pokemon Go raid events, ultra wormhole farming, dex chaining, the Masuda method, Dynamax Adventures, and other ways of the past of increasing the shiny odds, the value of a shiny Pokemon is virtually non-existent at this point. That's really about my only gripe with it though. Essentially, the entire concept feels like if you took the Battle Factory and applied some raid battles to it because you're using rental Pokemon rather than your own Pokemon. Overall, it's not bad at all. I spent a good chunk of my time in this game doing raids anyway, so this is good for me personally. And it's nice to see another form of cooperative play be included in the game, even if it is just a variation of what we had before. All in all, I'm glad they're putting a spotlight on cooperative content, and I really hope they continue to add more fun cooperative features like this in future titles. Then we have the Galarian Star Tournament, which, I'm gonna be honest with you, outside some funny dialogue, it's not exactly fantastic. It's fine and everything, but it's got some major issues. I was hoping this would be a little better, but it really just feels like a multi-battle option that's missing from the Battle Tower, except it's slightly worse because they don't change your Pokemon to level 50, so you can still have level 100 Pokemon while the lowest level your opponent can have is level 65 and the highest is level 80. On top of that, every trainer in the tournament, except for you, is restricted to 3 Pokemon, so you have a huge advantage over everyone else in the tournament. The only saving grace about it is seeing the characters interact with one another, even those that have never met. It's fine and everything, but this late into the game's life, it's too easy for me to want to spend 20 minutes at a time on. It doesn't even offer a new unique ribbon or even an existing ribbon for completion. The Galarian Star Tournament is by far the weakest part of the DLC to me. Outside of that, they didn't really offer too many brand new features or items like the Isle of Armor did, but what they did add feels fully realized, so I can't really complain about it too much more than I already have. If there's one real standout for the items, it'd be the ability patch, which works like the ability capsule, but for hidden abilities instead, which is honestly an amazing addition. Please don't remove it in future games. So that honestly covers it for the new features. So let's go ahead and start discussing the stories, and the characters included in those stories. I say stories instead of story, because there's a few small stories that make up this DLC. So if you want to avoid spoilers, feel free to click off the video and come back later. If you're good to go, then let's go ahead and start with the main one. The main story revolves around the legendary Pokemon Calyrex, and is honestly better than the train wreck that was Sword and Shield story and the Isle of Armors, which really just consisted of some half-baked trials and this. The story basically involves you helping Calyrex return to his full power. Calyrex's power is derived from people's belief in it, and since it became nothing but a myth, people stopped believing in it over time, meaning Calyrex became too weak to help people out with their harvests. It's a cycle. I should also mention that you actually speak directly to Calyrex in this DLC. Similar to how telepathy works in the movies, however, instead of talking to the player directly in their head, Calyrex demonically possesses Peony. Peony? I don't know how his name is pronounced, so I'm going to continue to call him Peony throughout the course of this video. Point is, you get information on Calyrex's situation from Calyrex himself, rather than through some random NPC who knows everything about myths and legends. This is the first bit of good news the story offers. It does something the rest of the mainline titles has never done, allowing you to not only talk to a Pokemon, but actually have a method of understanding it. This, unlike the bond you forged with Kubfu in the Isle of Armor, actually allows you to create a bond with Calyrex, since he's treated as an actual character rather than some random animal you need to befriend. It takes a chance in humanizing a Pokemon, and in my honest opinion, it paid off. It's probably not something they should do every game, but as an every now and again thing, it can create an interesting dynamic. Back to the story. After starting your expedition team with Peony, you take his pillow, which turns out to be a missing part of the statue in the center of town, and being the good guy main character man, you fix the statue, and that helps Calyrex regain a small enough portion of its power to speak with you directly. He explains what's going on, how the people of the Crown Tundra are suffering, how he's lost almost all of his power, how the people have stopped believing in him, and how even his horse has abandoned him. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing. There's a lot of details to run through, but I'll cover the important stuff as we continue. This does lead us back to the plot though. Since the people no longer believe in him, the way he's able to get his power back is by reuniting with his loyal steed. So that's really where this story ends up going. You find out what food the horse likes to eat, which, obviously it's carrots, come on. Then you have to plant them in a specific area to either summon Glacier or Spectre. God, I hope I'm pronouncing those names right. Calyrex does a little dance, grows a big ol' carrot, the horse attacks the town looking for more food, you beat it up, save the town, create an item called the Reins of Unity using some of the horse's hair that was left behind, and a flower petal Calyrex has the ability to forge with his remaining power, find out where the horse lives, lower its guard by feeding it the carrot, and Calyrex reunites with it and regains all his lost power. Again, obviously I'm paraphrasing a lot of this, but that about sums up the plot. From there, Calyrex allows you to battle in its new form, and you're able to catch it this time around. And they got my man Masuda back to compose the tracks for Calyrex and the Steeds, so you know the music is phenomenal. Overall, I'd say this story was actually pretty good. At the very least, it was consistent, although it was a little short. Legitimately, if they built an entire game revolving around Calyrex and the Crown Tundra from the start, Sword and Shield would have been a much better game. I'd put this on the same level as the Delta episode and the Looker Bureau stories in Gen 6, if not a little higher than them. It was pretty much just a ton of exposition dumping, but it was still an actually enjoyable experience nonetheless. The rest of the stories are a lot more cut and dry. They're not really stories per se, they're more or less side quests. Calyrex's story was the meat of the DLC, and honestly, I wouldn't mind playing through it again a few times. But let's go ahead and take a quick look at the other side quests. The Regis are back, and now you can have a full party of them. This side quest revolves around the legendary giants, titans, golems, Regis, whatever you want to call them, and it's pretty straightforward. There are a few temples scattered around the Crown Tundra. You go up to the door, do what the door says, it opens, you step on some dots, and you fight the Regi of that temple. Easy, there's nothing to it. There are even two new ones this time around, with Regieleki being the electric-type Regi, and Regidrago being the dragon-type Regi. These two aren't specific to either game either, but you actually end up getting a choice of which Regi you want, similar to how you can choose Glacier or Spectre during the main story. Once you've managed to get all 5 Regis, you can go to this specific raid den and fight Regigigas as well. Regigigas isn't exactly a part of this side quest because it doesn't have a page for it, but I figured it was still worth lumping in with the others. Overall, this was fine, and the fact that none of them are shiny locked, even the new ones, is honestly pretty good too. It doesn't hold a candle to the original Regi side quest in Gen 3, but let's be honest, no side quest in the history of Pokemon has been able to come anywhere close to that one. They reused the Sealed Chamber theme from Mega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, which is fine. It's like stepping into a little bit of Hoenn, which I'm not going to complain about. I didn't even expect the Sealed Chamber theme to make it in the game at all, and at least they used the more fitting Gen 6 variation rather than the Gen 3 one. But I am glad that they decided to remix the battle theme. It would have been weird for Regieleki and Regidrago to just use the Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire theme rather than just something brand new. Not much else to say really. It's pretty much just your standard catch quest. The Legendary Bird story was honestly something I was hoping to see a bit more of. I was hoping to see more of them fighting with one another like in the opening scene. Maybe causing havoc in the Crown Tundra due to their fighting, so you had to catch them to prevent things from getting worse or something. Or at the very least, something more involving the tree, since it was like, man, look at the size of that tree! Only for it to ultimately not matter at all. I don't know. What we got was fine, and it's still a good time, but they hyped them up quite a bit. After going through the cutscene, watching them fight, only to be interrupted by your phone ringing, they'll split up into 3 separate open world areas. Articuno will remain in the Crown Tundra. Zapdos will run off to the wild area, and Moltres will fly over the Isle of Armor. Articuno will spawn into a seemingly random area and create clones of itself, and you need to run into the right one in order to battle it. Zapdos will run quickly around the wild area until it gets tired, allowing you to catch up to it, and Moltres will fly in a set path around the Isle of Armor, so if you want, you can just wait for it to go around the whole island and get back to you, or give chase to it. I do like that they ended up making use of the 3 open world areas for these events, and that they didn't just reuse the Kanto Legendary theme from X and Y for these 3, and actually gave them their own theme. All in all, while I do wish there was a bit more story to this quest, it wasn't bad. To be honest with you, I'm only talking about this one because it got a title card. After finishing the other 3 stories, Peony leaves in a panic after having nothing left to do with his daughter because we finished everything, and drops a note at the door of the inn you're staying at. On the note, you can see an Ultra Wormhole with a strange Pokemon flying out of it. All you have to do is go into a Dynamax Adventure and catch Necrozma. That's it. I gotta say, I was hoping for more from this. Maybe after catching Necrozma, some Ultra Wormholes would randomly appear in a similar fashion to raid dens every now and again, or something? But no, it's just catch Necrozma and show it to Peony. Quick side note, it has to be a Necrozma caught in Sword and Shield. I tried showing him one I caught in Alola, but he didn't accept it, despite saying the same dialogue minus the dramatic camera angles. This was honestly kinda lame. I wish they did something more to commemorate the return of the Ultra Beast, but that's about the size of it, and that's it for Peony's quests in general. But there is one more to cover. Yeah, there's no title card for this one. Instead of receiving this from Peony, Sonia decides to say, "Hey, what's up?" Honestly, they may as well have just given this to Peony. Sonia played no role in this whatsoever. She stood inside a house and occasionally said, "Go here," which, at that point, it's already obvious where you need to go. She played less of a role here than Hop did in the Isle of Armor. It's like Hop and Sonia were added in these DLCs just to remind you that you're still playing Sword and Shield. But I digress. This side quest revolves around the Swords of Justice. You go around the Crown Tundra, finding footprints left by them to track them down, return to Sonia, and then you're able to catch and battle them. This is fine on paper, but honestly, it felt more like padding than anything else. Each footprint you found counted as 2% of data, meaning you needed to find 50 footprints for each sword, and they're more of a pain to find than anything else, because half the time you couldn't even really see them. After tracking them down and Sonia fiddling with a machine, she tells you to go catch them. Also, you know how they decided to remix the Regis theme? Yeah, the Swords of Justice don't get the same treatment. Instead of using their own theme, even their Gen 5 version, they use the standard Wild Battle theme, which blows a lot. You go through all that effort, and they don't even get their own theme. Sonia does reward you for catching the trio and bringing them back to her, with experience candies. Not like I had a million of those already. But there is a silver lining. Instead of just being able to catch the main 3, you're able to catch Keldeo as well. After catching all of them, you head to this random pot, make some curry with the main 3 in your party, and then Keldeo will spawn in. While the music was disappointing and the entire side quest was just tedious, you at least get the opportunity to catch a mythical Pokemon at the end of it. All in all, these were decent side quests. They honestly reminded me of the good old days when each mythical Pokemon would have an entire event dedicated to it, rather than just releasing a code and shoving it online to download. We need more things like this, and less online code distributions. Content like this is one thing that's been missing from the game since Gen 5, and it's great to see them return to it in some form or another. Catching and interacting with these new Pokemon feels far more rewarding than just getting a code and adding it to your game. Having some kind of event tied to Zaru's distribution, for example, would have been amazing. Before wrapping things up, we've talked about Calyrex and Sonia, but there are 2 characters that I didn't really touch up on that played a part in the DLC. The first being Peony's daughter. Peonia? I don't know how to pronounce her name either, but she's a hot-headed, angsty teen who loves taking part in Dynamax Adventures. That's about where her character ends. She shows up at the beginning of the DLC after completing the first 3 quests and then remains in a cave for the rest of eternity, occasionally giving you clothing items and telling you where a legend is. She's not that exciting. Peony, on the other hand, he's great. He's essentially just a generic stereotype of an overbearing father who's willing to do anything to have a good time with his daughter, but he's also kind of an idiot, but in a good way. He looks like the kind of guy who can and will rip you limb from limb, but then goes back to being that goofy dad stereotype. Oh yeah, he's also a former Steel-type gym leader, so bonus points for being a gym leader for my favorite type, and Rose's little brother. so it's nice to see that someone from Rose's family is actually enjoyable to see on screen. For a good chunk of the main story, he's really just used as a vessel that Calyrex speaks through, but when he's not being a rabbit thing's mind control puppet, he's got a loud personality. All in all, that about summarizes the DLC, so here's my final verdict on the expansion pass. I said it in my Isle of Armor review, and I stand by what I said then now. The Isle of Armor felt like an appetizer, whereas the Crown Tundra feels more like the main course. If we split the DLC's pricing down the middle, I wouldn't say the Isle of Armor lived up to the $15 on its end of the bargain. If you slash that price down to anywhere between $5 to $7, I'd say that'd be a fair assessment of what DLC 1 was worth. But the Crown Tundra, on the other hand, completely held up its end of the bargain. It offered something new, something that felt real, new characters, a good handful of new Pokemon, a decent little side plot, and at least one side feature that's worth taking part in. Overall, I'd say the Crown Tundra is the one reason to return to Sword and Shield. DLC is a good concept, and if we get DLC that's around the same level as what we got with the Crown Tundra, then it's something that I honestly hope we see more of in future games. However, and I've said it many times on this channel already, DLC shouldn't be an all-in-one solution for fixing a lack of content. The base game should have enough sustainable content on its own. The paid DLC is a fine route to take, especially if it means they get more time to spend on making their next game not end up as half-baked as Sword and Shield was. However, the Crown Tundra feels like what the base game should have been, even if it is a little short. The Isle of Armor feels like decent post-game content, and then the base game feels like a bad DLC. This isn't how things should be. All I can really hope for is that Game Freak gets things right later on down the line, and the Crown Tundra has reignited a spark in me for Pokemon. It's not much of a spark, but it's like a really dim candle in the middle of a pitch dark warehouse or something. That's a good metaphor, right? I don't know, it shows me that Game Freak can do the open world concept well enough, and that they can still make a decent story here and there. But they need to apply that level of effort to their base games, not just DLC as a band-aid. Anyhow, that's where I'll go ahead and leave things off. Let me know what you all thought about the DLC in the comments, and if you like this video, feel free to check out my other videos, my Twitter, Twitch, leave a like, sub, you know, all that end of the video smooth jazz, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.